They thought it was just another boy trying to steal, but no one imagined the real reason behind that package of bread, and even less that this moment would change two lives forever. When the security guard surrounded him, everyone was sure of what was going to happen, except the store owner. He noticed something different in that boy's eyes, something that no one else there was seeing. But what happened inside that room? Nobody, absolutely nobody, could have predicted it. Before I show you the surprising twist, pay attention.
The market's activity continued at its usual pace, with creaking carts and voices mingling with the sound of scales weighing fruit. Customers chose products without noticing the boy who cautiously walked between the shelves. Lucas, thin and in worn clothes, kept his eyes fixed on a package of bread that had just been placed there. The warm smell awakened something deeper than just physical hunger. He took a deep breath before doing what he didn't want to do, but felt he needed to. With trembling hands, Lucas approached the shelf and looked around to make sure no one was watching him. He pulled the package with quick movements, as if trying to avoid feeling guilty. The butterflies in his stomach betrayed his fear of being discovered, but he mentally repeated that it was just this once. He tried to tuck the package under his loose shirt, but his racing heart betrayed the urgency and desperation that accompanied him. Security guard Kleber, with a firm posture, watched the camera footage. A sudden movement caught his attention, a small figure trying to hide something. He frowned, immediately recognizing the behavior of someone about to make a mistake. Without hesitation, he walked towards the bread aisle. The tension in the air grew, even though the customers didn't notice. Lucas turned his back to the shelf and tried to walk normally, but his steps were uneven, betraying his anxiety. Sweat dripped down his forehead despite the cold air conditioning. He kept telling himself he needed to get out of there quickly. Still, each step seemed to increase the weight of his guilt. When he turned one of the corners, he came face to face with Kleber blocking the way. The security guard crossed his arms and gave him a serious, yet confused look. He saw no malice in the boy's eyes, only fear. Lucas froze in place, unable to run or speak. His bulging shirt betrayed the hidden object. Kleber discreetly called over the other security guard, Mauro, who approached with heavy steps. The two surrounded the boy without making a fuss so as not to attract the attention of the customers. Lucas felt the ground disappear beneath his feet and closed his eyes as if that could erase him from the moment. He wished to disappear, but reality was right in front of him. His heart was beating so hard it seemed to echo in his ears. Some customers began to notice what was happening and whispered amongst themselves. Judgmental glances began to appear, some curious, others indignant. To Lucas, each face seemed like an attack, each whisper a sentence. Shame mixed with hunger, creating a knot difficult to bear. The world around him seemed to shrink as he shrank. Raul, the owner of the market, watched everything from afar, noticing the tension in the central aisle. Seeing the boy surrounded, his expression changed to something more attentive and human. He walked over to the group, sensing there was more to the situation than a simple theft. The boy's gaze awakened an old memory that stirred him deeply. Raul knew he needed to act.
As he approached, Raul asked the security guards to remain calm. His tone was firm, but not aggressive. He observed Lucas attentively. Seeing beyond the act committed, there was a hidden story there, something that required understanding before any punishment. Raul suggested they take the boy to the office to talk. Surprised, the security guards hesitated, but obeyed. Lucas walked to the office as if crossing a courtroom corridor. Each step seemed heavier than the last. His throat was dry, and a mixture of fear and regret burned in his chest. The atmosphere of the market now seemed hostile, even without shouting or direct confrontations. The office door closed behind him, sealing the beginning of something he could never have imagined. Before you find out what will happen to the boy, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Here you'll find real and moving stories that make us reflect on empathy, choices, and humanity, like the one you're watching now. Subscribe and come experience more of these transformations with me. Inside the small office, the silence was so dense it seemed to fill the air. The simple desk, the small fan, and the narrow window contrasted sharply with the grandeur of the moment. Lucas remained standing, unsure where to place his hands. The package of bread, now exposed on the desk, seemed to scream his guilt. Raul analyzed the scene calmly and carefully. The security guards followed right behind, still convinced they should take harsher measures. Mauro muttered something about rules being rules, but Raul raised his hand, asking for silence. He wanted to understand, not just punish. Lucas, for his part, avoided looking at anyone, staring at the cold floor. The room seemed to shrink around him. Raul pulled up a chair and sat down slowly. His gesture was calculated so not to frighten the boy even more. In a low voice, he asked the boy's name. Lucas hesitated before answering, swallowing hard before murmuring his own name. The sound came out weak, almost inaudible. It was the first thread of trust that began to emerge. "Why did you take this?" Raul asked, pointing to the package. The question wasn't accusatory, it was simply a search for understanding. Lucas pressed his fingers together, feeling the shame burning his skin. He tried to speak, but his voice faltered twice before he could form a sentence. Still, nothing came out beyond a meaningless whisper. The prolonged silence began to bother the security guards. Kleber looked at Raul as if questioning his patience. Mauro crossed his arms and huffed impatiently, wanting to end the problem quickly. But Raul didn't let himself be shaken. He knew that putting too much pressure on him would only make things worse. His experience with people showed him that this boy was carrying something bigger than a petty theft. Raul then changed his approach. Instead of insisting on the question, he offered the boy a glass of water. Lucas hesitated, but accepted it with trembling hands. The simple gesture lessened the tension in the room. After a few sips, the boy breathed a little easier. It was as if that small act of kindness had opened a crack in his emotional block. Raul's eyes remained attentive, noticing every detail. The weariness on the boy's face, his thinness, the deep dark circles under his eyes. There were clear signs of someone facing greater difficulties than he could admit. This reinforced his conviction that punishment would solve nothing. On the contrary, it could worsen an already critical situation. Mauro, however, was not satisfied. He suggested calling the police again, arguing that cases like this happen again if we let our guard down. His harsh tone contrasted with Raul's calm demeanor. Kleber, though uncomfortable, seemed conflicted. He didn't like the idea of involving authorities, but he also felt the weight of the responsibility of his position. A silent conflict hung between them. Raul stood up and walked slowly to the door, closing it completely. The silent gesture showed that this conversation would be more serious than anyone expected. He returned to Lucas and knelt down to be at the same height as the boy. This movement dismantled all of the boy's defenses. Lucas closed his eyes, and a tear escaped, despite his effort. At that moment, the atmosphere changed. Raul realized he was one step away from discovering something important. Lucas, fragile, seemed on the verge of an emotional breakdown. It was clear that this moment would define not only the course of the conversation, but the boy's future, and Raul was willing to listen, even if it was difficult. The office door closed with a soft click, muffling the noise of the market. The atmosphere became silent, as if the world outside had been paused. Lucas remained motionless, his shoulders hunched, observing the worn floor. The feeling of being trapped began to intensify. His thoughts mingled in panic and regret. Raul took a deep breath before pulling his chair back. He sat down calmly, trying to ease the tension. The boy looked like a cornered animal, ready to react to any sudden movement. With each passing second, the silence revealed more about the boy's state than any words. The package of bread remained on the table, an undeniable proof of the mistake. The fan spun slowly, casting dancing shadows across the wall. Lucas shrank even further when he felt Raul's gaze on him. It wasn't a harsh or condemning look. It was a look that tried to pierce through the layer of fear and reach the truth. Even so, Lucas didn't know how to react. He was prepared for scolding, but not for gentleness. Raul rested his arms on the table and leaned slightly forward. He observed the boy's thinness, noticing how fragile his body seemed. The merchant's mind involuntarily returned to the past, to a time when he himself had to ask for help. This memory rekindled the certainty that the situation demanded more delicacy than rigidity. He needed to find the right key. Kleber approached the table and crossed his arms, staring at Raul.
The silence between them spoke volumes. It was a silent plea to know what to do next. Raúl raised his hand, indicating that he wanted to continue alone at that moment. The security guard stepped back a few paces, still suspicious, but alert. Lucas watched everything with teary eyes.
The boy finally looked up for a brief moment. He saw Raúl looking at him, and in that brief contact, he perceived something he hadn't expected. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was something deeper, worry. Raúl wasn't used to that feeling. The inner turmoil almost made him cry again. He quickly looked away. Raúl noticed the evident fear. He decided not to pressure him. Instead, he asked simple questions: where he lived, if he was studying, if he had siblings. No answer came immediately. Raúl seemed frozen. Each word was lost before it even came out. His silence spoke louder than any explanation. Raúl understood that he needed to persist gently, not forcefully. Carefully, Raúl pulled up another chair and placed it next to his own. He asked Lucas to sit there. The boy hesitated, but obeyed slowly, taking short steps. The physical proximity made his breathing quicken even more. Raúl noticed and kept his voice low and calm. It was an attempt to create a safe space within that cramped room. Kleber and Mauro exchanged uneasy glances in the background. To them, it seemed like wasted time. But for Raúl, it was the only way to achieve what truly mattered. The shopkeeper adjusted the package on the table, turning it so it wouldn't be pointed at as incriminating evidence. He wanted the boy to feel less intimidated. This small gesture changed the atmosphere. Lucas finally let out a weak sob, unable to maintain his facade of resistance. The sound echoed through the room, breaking down the last emotional wall he had built. The boy's face contorted as tears began to slowly stream down his face. Raúl knew this was the moment. The closed door behind them didn't mean prison, but rather the beginning of the truth about to be revealed. Raúl waited patiently for Lucas to catch his breath. His tears weren't loud, but they were deep. They were tears of shame, fear, and pent-up hunger. Each one revealed more than words could say. Raúl didn't rush the boy. He simply watched him with compassion. The waiting was part of the healing process. Seeing Lucas trying to wipe his face with his dirty sleeves, Raúl offered him a tissue. The boy hesitated, but accepted it with trembling hands. This simple gesture seemed to further dismantle his defenses. Lucas sniffled softly and took a deep breath, trying to organize the chaotic feelings that overwhelmed him. It was the first time someone had expected a response from him without aggression. "Are you hungry?" Raúl asked softly. Lucas gave an almost invisible nod, but enough to be understood. Raúl stood up and opened a drawer, taking out a small packet of biscuits. He placed it in front of the boy, without haste. The boy looked at it as if silently asking for permission. Raúl nodded. The boy took a biscuit and ate it slowly.
The sound of the package being opened caught the attention of the security guards. Mauro, already irritated by the approach, took a step forward, but Raúl again asked him to wait. He was in control of the situation. Kleber, although still tense, seemed to understand his boss's decision better. The atmosphere oscillated between discipline and humanity. Raúl needed to carefully balance everything. After eating a few cookies, Lucas took a deeper breath. His eyes were red, but there was a little more calm in his expression. Raúl saw this as an opportunity. "Why did you take the bread, Lucas?" The question came again, but now at a different emotional moment. Lucas looked at the package as if it were heavier than it actually was. This time, his voice managed to come out. "My mother, she hasn't eaten since yesterday," Lucas whispered, almost choking on his own words. Raúl felt his heart clench. That revelation wasn't just sad, it was urgent. Lucas continued, "I tried asking, but nobody helps anymore." The boy lowered his head, pressing his hands between his knees. The shame was almost palpable. The security guards fell silent. Even Mauro, previously so rigid, seemed to lose some of his stiff demeanor. Kleber looked away, clearly affected by what he had heard. Raúl knew he was facing something much bigger than a theft incident. It was a social reality, presented raw and unfiltered. His mother's illness, hunger, lack of support, all of this had pushed Lucas into that mistake. Raúl leaned in again,
Looking into the boy's eyes, he saw no malice, only despair. "You tried to solve it the wrong way, Lucas, but I understand why." The sentence was like a permission for the boy to breathe. Lucas cried again, but now it wasn't a cry of fear, it was a cry of relief. He had finally been heard. Finally, someone had believed him. The merchant ran his hand through his hair, thinking about the best way to proceed. He knew the situation demanded more than just conversation. It demanded action. But he also knew he needed to act responsibly. Nothing could be rushed. Lucas was still trembling, still fearing what would come next. Raúl needed to show that his help was real. Raúl stood up and walked over to the security guards. He spoke softly and firmly, saying he wouldn't call the police. Mauro opened his mouth to protest, but Kleber discreetly held him by the arm. Raúl had made a decision. He turned back to Lucas and carefully placed his hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone." And for the first time, Lucas seemed to believe it.
Silence filled the room again after Raúl's words. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to control the sobs that insisted on escaping. It was difficult for him to believe that anyone actually wanted to listen to him. He wiped his face with the crumpled handkerchief, still too afraid to fully raise his gaze. Even so, he felt that something inside him had begun to give way. The barrier he had built over the months was finally breaking down. Raúl pulled the chair a little closer, but without encroaching on the boy's space. He knew that every inch mattered, that Lucas needed to feel safe to continue. "Tell me more about your mother," he asked calmly. Lucas pressed his lips together, trying to hold back the words and the tears, but the question hit exactly where it hurt. His eyes became even more moist.
"She's sick. She's had a fever for days. She can't get up properly," Lucas began, his voice choked with emotion. Raúl tilted his head, showing that he was listening attentively. "She tries to hide it from me, but I see that it's getting worse." The boy's breathing faltered as he spoke. It was the first time he had put into words all the despair he had been carrying alone. All of this weighed too heavily on his 11 years. Lucas explained that he had left home early, hoping to find somewhere he could ask for help. He also said that he had tried before, but many people simply ignored him or chased him away. He spoke about hunger, about the pain of seeing his mother grow weaker each day. The boy gripped the hem of his own shirt tightly, as if that kept him upright. Raúl felt each word as an emotional blow. "The bread was for her. It wasn't for me," Lucas said, finally looking at Raúl for a brief second. The boy's gaze was a mixture of guilt and love. Raúl took a deep breath, feeling a wave of indignation mixed with compassion. How could a child that age carry so much weight? How had no one noticed the gravity of the situation before? Kleber, standing at the back of the room, let his arms relax. He no longer seemed like the same rigid security guard from the beginning. His eyes were softer, and he swallowed hard as he listened to the boy's account. Mauro, who had previously advocated punishment, now seemed uncomfortable with his own earlier stance. Lucas's truth had shaken the entire room. It was impossible to ignore it. Raúl kept his voice low. "You shouldn't have stolen, Lucas, but I know you didn't do it out of malice." He needed to make it clear that the act had been wrong, but without destroying the courage of the boy to open up. Lucas nodded slowly, understanding. It was the first time someone had explained this without aggression. The moral weight was still there, but it wasn't accompanied by fear. "Why didn't you ask for help before?" Raúl asked. Lucas gave a sad, almost ironic smile. "When we ask, nobody listens," he replied. That deeply touched the shopkeeper's heart. He realized that the boy was not only financially abandoned, but also emotionally. The lack of listening had perhaps hurt more than the hunger itself. Raúl felt a stronger urge to protect him. The outpouring continued for a few more minutes, with Lucas recounting details of the difficult daily life he faced. He spoke slowly, as if each sentence were a painful effort, but with each revelation, his breathing became a little less heavy. Raúl understood. They were things he needed to get off his chest in order to finally breathe. The boy had never had a safe space for that until now.
When he finished, Lucas shrank back slightly, as if awaiting a final verdict. But Raoul didn't judge. Instead, he placed his hand on his shoulder again. "Thank you for trusting me," he said, sincerely. Lucas's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected gratitude. In that instant, something profoundly changed within him. For the first time in a long time, he felt that he mattered to someone.
Raoul stood up slowly, his gaze still fixed on Lucas. He needed to think quickly, but clearly. Opening the office door, he was met by anxiously waiting security guards. Kleber tried to hide his emotion, but his red eyes betrayed him. Mauro, more rigid, maintained his composure, but his expression was less harsh than before. Both wanted answers, though for different reasons. Raoul briefly explained what Lucas had said. The words hung in the air, leaving a heavy silence between the three. Mauro crossed his arms, but this time not with an air of authority, rather with uncertainty. "It's complicated, Raoul, but it's still theft," he murmured, trying to maintain a sense of responsibility. Kleber tried to hide his emotion, but his red eyes betrayed him. Mauro, more rigid, maintained his composure, but his expression was less harsh than before. Both wanted answers, though for different reasons. Raoul briefly explained what Lucas had said. The words hung in the air, leaving a heavy silence between the three. Mauro crossed his arms, but this time not with an air of authority, rather with uncertainty. "It's complicated, Raoul, but it's still theft," he murmured, trying to maintain a sense of responsibility. Kleber, however, stepped forward. "But it's a child, Mauro, a child crying for help." The exchange of glances between the two showed that the situation was affecting them more than they wanted to admit. Raoul understood at that moment that he needed to be firm in his decision. Punishing someone who is asking for help won't solve anything, he stated firmly. Mauro opened his mouth to argue, but couldn't find the words. It was difficult to disagree when you saw the truth so closely. Donna Teresa appeared in the hallway after overhearing part of the conversation. With her affectionate and maternal demeanor, she approached slowly, observing Raoul attentively. "Is that the boy I saw crying?" she asked with concern. Raoul nodded. She sighed deeply, placing her hand on her chest. "Poor thing. There are too many children going through in this world." Her expression was of genuine sadness. "He said his mother is sick," Raoul explained. Teresa shook her head, dismayed. "Oh my God, this changes everything." The security guards fell silent at her reaction. It was as if hearing someone so experienced confirm the seriousness of the situation reinforced what they were already feeling. Raoul realized that there was support there, even if it wasn't openly confessed. Mauro finally took a deep breath, rubbing his face with his hands. I don't know, Raoul. It's difficult for us, too. We have rules." The shopkeeper approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know you have a difficult job, but today, more than security, we need to be human." Kleber nodded immediately. Mauro hesitated, but gradually his face relaxed. Raoul knew he needed the team by his side for what was to come. "I'll talk to him some more. Then I'll decide what we're going to do." Donna Teresa put her hand on Raoul's shoulder. "If you need me, I'm here." She said this not just as an employee, but as someone who had seen the neighborhood children grow up. She understood pain, poverty, and abandonment better than many there.
Before returning to the office, Raoul looked at the security guards and said, "I know you were just doing your job, but today we need to do something bigger." Kleber nodded again, a new gleam in his eyes. Mauro took another deep breath, finally giving in. "Okay, Raoul, we'll trust you." That was all the merchant needed to hear. He returned to the room and found Lucas sitting in the same position, hugging his own arms. The boy looked up as soon as Raoul entered, as if expecting the worst, but the shopkeeper closed the door calmly and smiled gently. "Everything's all right," he said, and for the first time, Lucas believed that perhaps it really was. Raoul remained silent for a few seconds, simply observing Lucas. The boy seemed smaller than he actually was, as if life had shrunk his spirit prematurely. Raoul felt an old weight in his chest, something that hadn't surfaced in years. A distant memory began to take shape, the memory of when he too needed help and had nowhere to turn.
The parallel between the two struck him hard. He walked to the table and leaned against it, reflecting on what he should do. His duty as a merchant demanded firmness, rules, and protocol, but his duty as a human being demanded something different. His mind wavered between reason and emotion, between what the world expected of him and what his heart asked for. Lucas, however, remained motionless, like someone preparing for a final verdict. The tension between the two was almost palpable. "I'm trying to think of the best way to help you," Raúl finally said, breaking the silence. Lucas slowly raised his eyes as if not believing what he was hearing. He was so used to being punished or expelled that the idea of help sounded strange. Raúl noticed this hesitation and moved a little closer. "I know you made a mistake, but I also know there are reasons behind it, reasons that no one should ignore." Lucas clenched his fingers, feeling a strange mixture of relief and fear. He didn't know how to react. He was prepared for the worst, but not for kindness. Raúl then pulled up a chair to sit near him, but not so close as to intimidate him. This calculated distance showed respect. Lucas realized this, and it made his chest ache differently, not with fear, but with emotion. Raúl's past memories kept echoing in his mind. He remembered when, as a young man, he tried to ask for food at a bakery. The owner yelled at him and threw him out, but a customer, a lady, called him back and gave him bread and guidance. That marked him forever. Now he realized he had the opportunity to be for Lucas what that lady had been for him. Lucas looked up again when Raúl took a deep breath. "I don't want you to leave here worse than you came in," the shopkeeper said. The boy blinked several times, as if trying to hold back the tears that threatened to return. Raúl noticed this and softened his tone even more. "And I don't want you to do it again either. Not because you'll be punished, but because you deserve better."
Outside, the noise of the market continued its normal flow, but inside, time seemed suspended. Lucas's breathing gradually stabilized. He felt he could trust, even if that trust was still accompanied by fear. Raúl analyzed each of the boy's reactions and knew he was about to make a decision that would change the course of the day and the boy's life. It was a decision he couldn't go back on. Dona Teresa appeared discreetly in the half-open doorway, just to check on them. Her tender gaze shifted from Raúl to Lucas, and she smiled calmly. It was a silent way of showing support. Raúl thanked her with a nod and closed the door again. He wanted privacy for the moment he was about to drive. Lucas observed everything, surprised by the lack of pressure and the gentleness involved. Raúl took another deep breath before speaking. "Lucas, I want to make you a proposition." The boy swallowed hard, startled. The word proposal had never been used against him in that tone. Lucas's heart raced, but this time for different reasons. "Nothing bad," Raúl added quickly, "but I need to know if you're willing to listen." Lucas nodded slowly. It was the step Raúl needed. The merchant then straightened up in his chair. His eyes, firm yet gentle, reflected the importance of that moment. He had reached the point of deciding between the written rule and the human rule, and he knew that in some way, his life would also change from that point on. Lucas watched, sensing that the decision to come would be greater than he imagined. The transformation would begin now. Raúl took a short breath before beginning. It was as if he were about to take a step that required courage, not because of the difficulty, but because of the responsibility. He rested his elbows on his knees and looked directly at Lucas. "I'm not going to punish you," he began firmly. Lucas's eyes widened, completely taken by surprise. This contradicted all his expectations. He seemed unsure if he had heard correctly. Before the boy could react, Raúl continued, "But that doesn't mean we won't talk about what happened. It means I believe you deserve a chance." Lucas blinked a few times, trying to process what that sentence meant. No one had ever spoken to him like that. The world had always treated him as a problem, not as someone with potential. That deeply touched his heart. "I want to make a deal with you," Raúl said. Lucas, still in shock, simply nodded. "You come here every day after school. You help me at the market with some simple tasks, nothing heavy. In exchange, you take food home. With dignity. The word dignity made Lucas's chest tighten. It was a big, beautiful word, rare in his life. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was too emotional to answer. His eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief and of something he barely recognized, hope. Raúl noticed this and gently placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. But this will only work if you want it to. I can't force you.
Lucas tried to answer, but his voice failed him on the first attempt. He swallowed hard and finally managed to say, in a whisper, "I want to." Raúl smiled sincerely, and the boy felt that that smile carried something real, something that no one had given him in a long time. It was as if, at that moment, the world had changed color, even slightly. Outside, the security guards waited, trying to listen without seeming intrusive. Kleber wrung his hands, clearly moved by the possibility of something good happening. Mauro, though still stiff, seemed to be reflecting on everything he had heard so far. Raúl's proposal not only disconcerted Lucas, it also broke down invisible walls around everyone involved. Raúl continued explaining the agreement calmly. "I can go with you to your house today, see how your mother is doing. Maybe I can help with something." Lucas's eyes widened again, feeling fear and hope mingling. No one had ever shown interest in his personal life. He hesitated for a few seconds, but finally nodded, still speechless. The office door opened slowly as Raúl called the security guards in for a chat. Kleber went in first, his expression gentle. Mauro followed, more reserved, but visibly less hostile. Raúl explained his decision, and for the first time that day, no one argued. Kleber agreed immediately. Mauro took a deep breath and gave a single nod, honestly yielding. It was the signal that everyone was on the same page. Raúl turned to Lucas. "If you want, we can go see your mother now." The boy stood up slowly, still trembling, but in a different way. It was the trembling of someone leaving fear behind to enter a new, uncertain path, yet full of possibilities. He held the package of bread more firmly, not as something stolen, but as a symbol of the beginning of something new. Raúl opened the door and said, "Let's go together." And so, alongside the man who chose to see beyond the mistake, Lucas took his first step towards a different future, a future he never imagined he deserved. When Raúl and Lucas left the office, the market was already buzzing with excitement about what had happened. There were no shouts, but curious glances followed their every move. Some customers whispered amongst themselves, expressing surprise at the merchant's decision. Others watched with a mixture of judgment and incomprehension. For many, it was strange to see someone treat a theft with compassion instead of punishment. Raúl walked beside Lucas with a firm posture, conveying confidence. He wouldn't allow the boy to feel any less than he already had that day. Lucas, in turn, tried to avoid stares, partially hiding his face behind the bread bag. His heart beat fast, but now the feeling was less one of fear and more of exposure. The shame still existed, but accompanied by something new, the feeling of being protected. Dona Teresa appeared between the shelves and smiled warmly when she saw the two together. Dona Teresa appeared between the shelves and smiled warmly when she saw the two together. "Everything will be all right, my son," she said to Lucas, gently touching his arm. The boy was surprised by the affection and responded with a small, shy wave. It was strange to be treated with kindness by strangers. The employee's gesture eased some of the tension he felt towards the people around him.
Some customers discreetly approached Raúl, questioning his decision.
"Are you sure, Raúl? Today it's him, tomorrow it could be someone else,"
commented an elderly lady, though without aggression. Raúl smiled gently and explained that each case needed to be seen as it truly was. "This isn't just a theft, it's a cry for help that no one has heard before," he replied with serene firmness. The lady blinked a few times, touched by the explanation. Meanwhile, Kleber watched from afar, arms crossed with a reflective expression. He seemed proud of his boss's demeanor. Mauro, on the other hand, remained further away, still processing everything, but without his previous rigidity. When Raúl and Lucas passed by him, the security guard gave a slight nod to the boy. Lucas was confused,
but timidly returned the nod. It was the first time he had seen respect coming from that man. Near the checkout counter, a conversation began among customers. Some defended Raul's attitude, saying that more humanity was needed. Others thought it was risky to give so much freedom. These opinions echoed through the room, but Raul remained calm. He knew that the decision he had made would not please everyone, but it pleased his own conscience. And that was the most important thing at that moment. Lucas began to realize that even with curious glances, no one was hurting him. The simple fact that Raul was walking beside him protected him emotionally. It was as if the boy was discovering a world where there were still people willing to believe in him. This discovery awakened something deep in his heart, something he couldn't name, but which resembled hope. As they passed near the exit, Raul touched Lucas's shoulder. "Let's sort out your situation first," he said calmly. Lucas nodded, still surprised that someone cared about his life outside of there. The boy realized that the fear from before was diminishing, replaced by a strange feeling of security. He didn't know how long that feeling would last, but that day it was real. Before leaving, Raul gave his team one last look. Kleber smiled. Mauro simply took a deep breath, but his gaze was no longer of resistance, but of reflection. Raul knew that this day would not only change Lucas, it would also change the market. It would change the way everyone perceived the small dramas that crossed its corridors. He pushed the door open and let the street lights bathe them both. As soon as they stepped outside, the world seemed quieter, quiet yet full of meaning. There, in front of a neighborhood that would witness the story of that boy, Lucas realized that perhaps his life was about to take a completely new path, and that path began with a simple step alongside Raul. The next day, the sun had barely arisen when Lucas woke up. He had slept little, anxious and nervous about his appointment with Raul. His mother, still weak, watched her son get ready carefully. The boy tried to hide his fear and his excitement at the same time. It was strange for him to have a place to go, a place where someone was actually waiting for him. The feeling was almost unreal.
The walk to the market seemed longer than the day before. Lucas carried the same worn-out sneakers, but now he felt that each step carried a new meaning. He repeated to himself that he needed to do everything right. He was afraid of disappointing Raul, afraid that the opportunity would be taken away if he made a mistake. The responsibility weighed heavily, but it was a good weight, the weight of someone who wants to do their best. When he arrived at the market, he found Dona Teresa arranging fruit at the entrance. Upon seeing Lucas, she smiled so broadly that it brightened the morning. "Good morning, my son. Ready to start?" Lucas felt a little shy, but smiled back. It was rare for someone to wish him good morning with such affection. He responded with a timid nod. Teresa led him inside, as if she were introducing a new member of the family. Raul appeared minutes later, holding a clipboard. He smiled when he saw Lucas waiting, steady next to Teresa. "Punctual. I like that," he said. Lucas straightened his back, proud of the simple compliment. It was the first time someone had recognized something positive in his posture. Raul placed his hand on his shoulder once more, guiding him down the hallway. "Today, you'll start by helping with light tasks." The first tasks were simple: collecting shopping carts, tidying low shelves, and helping Teresa organize the packaging. Lucas tried his best. Even when he didn't know exactly what to do, he watched Teresa attentively, learning every gesture, every detail. His dedication caught the attention of the employees, who began to see him in a different light. Raul watched from a distance, satisfied. The boy made mistakes, of course. At one point, a box of products he was trying to carry fell. He panicked, thinking he would be reprimanded, but Raul simply approached and said, "Making mistakes is part of life. Let's fix it together." Lucas felt his heart warm inside. The simplicity of that gesture was something great to him. For the first time, someone was teaching him without humiliating him. Customers noticed Lucas working and began asking who the boy was. Some recognized the boy from the previous day's incident and reacted with surprise to see him helping. One gentleman praised Raul's decision, saying the world needed more people like him. Others simply watched with curiosity. Lucas felt the stares, but now they didn't hurt him. They were part of his new beginning. Throughout the morning, Lucas gradually loosened up. A slight smile began to appear on his face whenever he managed to complete a task correctly. Teresa, noticing this, encouraged him with kind words, like someone caring for a newborn sprout. Raúl watched this scene with growing pride. He knew he had made the right choice, and he also knew that this boy was very valuable.
When lunchtime arrived, Raúl called Lucas over to rest. They sat at the back of the market, where there was a small makeshift table. Raúl brought food for both of them, insisting that Lucas eat slowly and calmly. The boy tried to thank him, but his voice faltered with emotion. Raúl simply smiled and said, "You deserve this, and much more than you imagine." At the end of his shift, Lucas realized he didn't want to leave. For the first time, he felt like he belonged. It was an unfamiliar feeling, but deeply comforting. Raúl handed him a bag with some groceries to take home. "You did a good job today," the shopkeeper said. Lucas clutched the bag to his chest and responded with the most genuine smile he had ever given. That was just the first step, but it was already enough to show that his life could and would change. Raúl walked beside Lucas through the simple streets of the neighborhood. The sun was beginning to set, tinging the sky with orange hues. Lucas held tightly to the bag he had received from the market, as if it were something too precious to be dropped. He was quieter than usual, but not out of fear, rather out of uncertainty. It was the first time someone from outside had followed his steps home. The streets were narrow, with small houses and walls worn by time. Raúl observed everything attentively, feeling the growing weight of responsibility. He didn't know what he would find, but he was prepared to help in any way he could. Lucas pointed to a simple house with a chipped wooden door. "It's here," he said, almost in a whisper. Raúl nodded and placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, preparing him for the moment. Lucas went in first and called for his mother in a low voice. Raúl remained outside for a few seconds, respecting the family's space. When Lucas called him, he took 2 steps and went inside. The house was simple, with few pieces of furniture and a dark atmosphere. The smell of dust mixed with that of weak medicines permeated the air. In the corner, a thin, pale woman tried to sit down to receive the visitor. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Mariana," said Raúl gently. She smiled weakly, recognizing the shopkeeper. "I'm sorry to receive you like this," she murmured, trying to adjust the sheet covering her legs. Raúl shook his head, saying she didn't need to worry about it. The shopkeeper quickly observed the signs of tiredness, fever, and evident weakness. Something about that scene tightened his chest. Lucas approached her and placed the bag of food beside her. "I brought food, Mom," he said, his eyes shining with pride. The woman looked at him with deep tenderness, as if witnessing a miracle. She ran her hand through her son's hair and thanked him with a choked voice. Raúl observed the interaction with respect, realizing how much that boy carried on his shoulders. "Lucas told me a little about what you're going through," Raúl said carefully. Mariana lowered her gaze, embarrassed. "I didn't want him to bother anyone," she confessed. "He never bothered anyone," Raúl replied firmly. "He just needed someone to listen." The woman closed her eyes for a moment, clearly moved by those simple yet rare words. Raúl asked permission to take her temperature with his hand on her forehead, just to get a sense of the severity. The fever was evident, but it didn't seem recent. Mariana was too weak, probably malnourished and tired. "We need to take her to the health center tomorrow," said Raúl, in a tone that didn't accept objections. Mariana tried to say she didn't want to be a bother, but Lucas held her hand and insisted. "You are not alone," Raúl reassured her. Mariana looked at him with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. There was something in the merchant's gaze that conveyed confidence. Lucas watched the two of them, sensing that something good was finally happening in his home. For the first time in months, he saw hope reflected in his mother's eyes, albeit timidly. Raúl stayed there for a few more minutes, helping to tidy the room, organizing some belongings, and checking if she had any medication. Lucas accompanied him, imitating his gestures, as if he were learning about caregiving for the first time. Mariana watched everything with teary eyes. It was hard to believe that someone had cared so much without asking for anything in return. As he said goodbye, Raúl shook Mariana's hand and said, "Don't worry, we'll sort this out." Lucas walked him to the door and stood there, watching as Raúl walked away. The boy felt something different in his chest, a mixture of admiration, security, and gratitude. For the first time, he believed his life could truly change. That night ended lighter than all the previous ones. The next day, Lucas arrived at the market even before Raúl. He seemed more animated, with firmer steps and a discreet gleam in his eye. Dona Teresa saw him enter and opened her arms, as if welcoming a beloved grandson. "You came early, huh?" she joked, adjusting her apron. Lucas smiled shyly and replied, "I want to learn properly." The employee smiled, proud of the boy. Raúl arrived minutes later, surprised to find him so committed. "That's dedication," he commented, giving Lucas a light pat on the shoulder. The boy straightened his posture, as if trying to stand a little taller. The relationship between the two was already beginning to attract the attention of the staff. There was something special about that bond, something that inspired a mixture of respect and tenderness. As the days went by, Lucas's presence went from curious to completely normal within the market. Employees called him by name, taught him little tricks, corrected him patiently, and celebrated his small achievements. He learned quickly, observed everything, and had a genuine desire to help. This brought new life to the work environment. Raúl began implementing small changes in the market inspired by the boy's story. He created a discreet donation box where customers could leave food for families in need. He also set aside a few hours a week to talk to the young people from the neighborhood who came by. Gradually, that small market became a community support center.
Customers noticed the difference. Some asked about Lucas and were surprised by his effort. The story about the boy who tried to steal but got a chance began to circulate positively. People in the neighborhood began to admire Raúl for his humane attitude. The shopkeeper wasn't seeking recognition, but it was impossible not to notice that something special was happening. Lucas, for his part, was blossoming. Each day seemed to lessen the weight of the shadows he carried. He smiled more, talked more, and even risked some playful interactions with Teresa. The security guards also began to treat him with affection. Kleber guided him like an older brother. Mauro, although still serious, showed respect and even concern for the boy. The most visible change was in the way Lucas walked through the market. Before, his steps were short, hunched, almost invisible. Now he walked confidently, completing tasks and greeting customers. He felt for the first time that he was useful, that he had value, and that he was part of a place that believed in him. Raúl watched everything with silent pride. He knew there was still much to be resolved: his mother's health, financial stability, Lucas's school life, but the most important thing had already been achieved. The boy believed in himself, and that changed absolutely everything. Raúl had also changed. He was more attentive, more sensitive, more willing to listen to the stories behind each face that entered the store. As the weeks passed, the market gained a new energy. Employees talked more amongst themselves, customers were kinder, and a sense of community spread through the aisles. And it had all started with a package of bread hidden under a shirt. A mistake, a gesture, a chance, and a whole life ahead to be transformed. The days at the market were going smoothly when, during a break, Kleber leaned against the counter watching Lucas organize some boxes. The boy seemed focused, his movements now more confident. Kleber felt a familiar tightness in his chest, something he had been trying to ignore for a long time. Raúl noticed the security guard's distant gaze and approached. "Is something bothering you?" he asked in a low voice. Kleber took a deep breath before answering. "That boy, he reminds me of someone." Raúl waited, knowing the security guard rarely opened up. "He reminds me of myself," he finished with a sad smile. Raúl remained silent, letting him continue. The security guard rested his elbows on the counter, staring into space as if revisiting difficult parts of his own past.
It was rare to see him so vulnerable. I also went hungry when I was little. I lived with my grandmother because my mother had disappeared. There were days I went to bed without eating. Raul listened attentively, feeling the impact of the words. And when I tried to steal a loaf of bread from a grocery store, the owner hit me. He said I was a bum and that I would never amount to anything. Kleber's firm voice trembled for the first time in years.
Lucas, oblivious to the conversation, continued his work in silence. Kleber watched the boy with teary eyes, trying to hide it. When I saw him holding that bread, it was like I'd gone back in time. Raul placed his hand on the security guard's shoulder. "That's why you were so affected," he said understandingly. Kleber nodded. It was the first time he'd admitted it aloud. If someone had given me a chance, maybe I would have suffered less. The security guard took a deep breath, suppressing the emotion that threatened to escape. Raul remained by his side, respecting that moment. "Now you can be that chance for him," the shopkeeper replied. Kleber looked away, discreetly wiping the corner of his eye. I am trying." At that moment, Mauro approached, overhearing part of the conversation unintentionally. He stood still, uncomfortable, as if he too carried something unspoken. "We make mistakes when we judge too quickly," he murmured, almost in a whisper. Raul turned to him, surprised by his sincerity. It was rare to see Mauro reflecting so deeply, but Lucas's story had affected everyone, each in their own way. The three men stood silent for a few moments, watching the boy strive to create a different future. It was like watching a seed germinate after years in hard soil, and deep down, everyone there knew they were witnessing something special. Lucas, without knowing it, was mending broken parts not only of his own life, but of theirs as well. When Lucas lifted his face and smiled from afar, Kleber returned the gesture with a shy wave. It was a small gesture, but laden with profound meaning. Lucas may not have understood it at that moment, but he had touched an old wound in the security guard and at the same time helped to heal it. Kleber's past resurfaced not as pain, but as motivation to do things differently. The rest of the afternoon went smoothly, but that conversation marked the beginning of a deeper change within the team. Raul realized that it wasn't just Lucas who was evolving. Everyone in the market was being transformed. Each gesture of empathy created waves bigger than anyone could measure. And that day, once again, the story of a boy began to heal a grown man. A few weeks later, the market was packed when Lucas noticed something familiar, a lost, frightened look, very similar to the one he himself had months before. Near the biscuit shelves, a small boy, perhaps 8 years old, paced restlessly, clutching his hungry stomach. Lucas watched the boy for a few seconds, immediately recognizing the desperation in his eyes. The boy looked from side to side, making sure no one saw him. He reached out to grab a packet of biscuits, hesitating in exactly the same way Lucas had hesitated that afternoon in the past. Lucas felt his heart race. It was like looking at a younger version of himself. He took a step forward calmly, remembering how Raul had approached him.
He approached slowly, without startling the boy. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, in the same gentle tone Raul had used with him. The boy startled and tried to hide the package behind his back, but Lucas smiled kindly. "I know how it is. I've done the same thing." The boy's eyes widened, unsure if he believed him, but that sentence made him curious enough not to run away immediately. Lucas knelt down to be at his level, just as Raul had done. "You're hungry, aren't you?" The boy hesitated, but eventually nodded, his eyes welling up with tears. Lucas extended his open hand, not to take the package, but to show that there was no danger. "Come with me. You don't need to hide." The boy was confused, but something in Lucas's gaze conveyed confidence. He took the boy to Doña Teresa, who quickly understood what was happening. Her maternal gaze softened even more. "Come here, dear. Let's sort this out." The boy held the package of cookies tightly, as if he still expected to be reprimanded. Lucas stayed by his side, offering reassurance. It was as if he were giving back to the world the same chance he had received. Raul appeared soon after, observing the scene with surprise and pride. He saw Lucas repeat, almost instinctively, the same gestures that had changed his own life. He said nothing. He simply smiled, realizing that the cycle of empathy was growing naturally, without needing to be forced. The boy, distressed, began to explain that his mother was unemployed and that he felt ashamed to ask for help. Lucas listened patiently, just as Raul had listened to his story. When the little boy finished, his eyes filled with tears, Lucas placed his hand on his shoulder. "It's okay. You don't have to do this alone." Raul felt a lump in his throat. It was like watching a seed germinate after much care. The kindness he had planted was blossoming in another heart. Teresa prepared a small bag of food and handed it to the boy. "Take this to your mother and tell her you can come talk to me, okay?" The boy nodded, moved, and hugged the bag as if it were a treasure. Lucas walked to the door with him, reiterating that he was there if he needed anything. The boy looked back one last time and waved gratefully. When Lucas returned, Raul was waiting for him near the cash register, smiling. "You did well," said the shopkeeper. Lucas felt his face heat up, embarrassed by the compliment. "I only did what you did for me," he replied, with sincere simplicity. Raul placed his hand on his shoulders, proudly. And that's exactly what makes everything so special. At that moment, Lucas realized something he had never fully understood. Kindness multiplies when it finds a heart willing to receive it. He was no longer just the boy who needed help. Now he was also someone capable of helping. And this transformed not only the market, but the entire neighborhood, one gesture at a time.
The late afternoon at the market brought a golden light that streamed through the glass door, softly illuminating the aisles. Raul watched Lucas carefully arranging the shelves, while the little boy he had helped that day walked out, firmly holding his bag of groceries. There was an air of tranquility in the place, a kind of peace built little by little, gesture by gesture. Raul smiled as he saw how everything fit together. Lucas, though still young, seemed to carry a new maturity in his gaze. He had changed not only his own life, but also the way the people around him perceived pain and need. Raul walked up to him, proud, crossing his arms in a relaxed manner. "You did a good job today," he commented, observing how the boy truly cared about others. Lucas smiled, a slight smile, the kind that only appears on someone who has finally found their place in the world. "I only did what you would do," he replied. Raul chuckled softly. "Yeah, but not everyone would do that. It comes from your heart." Lucas lowered his gaze, a little embarrassed but clearly happy. It was the first time he saw himself as someone capable of making an impact, and not just as someone who needed saving. Dona Teresa approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "This boy here has a future, Raul," she said proudly. "Soon he'll be teaching us." Lucas laughed, and the sound echoed down the hallway like a breath of new life. The employee, who had seen so many difficult stories in the neighborhood, was now witnessing one that finally ended with hope. The cycle of kindness was working, and she knew that was rare. Kleber, who had been watching from afar, also approached. He stopped beside Lucas and gave him a light pat on the shoulder. "You're becoming an example, kid," he said, in a tone that was half playful, half emotional. Lucas looked up, surprised, and smiled gratefully. Mauro, though even more reserved, made a discreet gesture of approval. Even he had been touched in some way by the change that had occurred there. Raul realized how everyone was connected at that moment, as if an invisible current united each person present. The market, which had previously been just a commercial space, had become a welcoming place. People now talked more, observed more, judged less, all because of a boy who one day tried to steal a package of bread without permission. The irony of it did not escape Raul's notice. In the midst of his daily tasks, Lucas approached the shopkeeper. "Do you think I can continue coming to work here even when things get better at home?" Raul placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and replied firmly, "Of course you can. There will always be a place for you here." Lucas breathed a sigh of relief. It was more than a job. It was belonging. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon when Raul noticed the market activity slowing down. He perceived something in Lucas's eyes, something that hadn't been present the day he met him. Hope. The boy no longer walked hunched over.
no longer spoke with fear. Now he had poise, purpose, willpower, and that was a victory that no money could buy.
When the market closed, the group said goodbye amidst light laughter and quiet conversation. Lucas was the last to leave, looking back for a moment, observing the space that had changed his life. He smiled, clutched the food package to his chest, and took a few steps along the sidewalk. His shadow cast a long shadow on the ground, as if announcing a future greater than he had imagined. Raul stood in the doorway, watching Lucas walk away. He knew that story didn't end there, because when someone chooses to extend a hand instead of pointing a finger, the good doesn't end, it multiplies. And in that simple neighborhood, in that small shop, a cycle of empathy had begun. A cycle that wouldn't end there, and that, without a doubt, would change many other lives. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many others are still waiting for you. Subscribe to the channel now and be part of this chain of empathy and transformation. Each story here reminds you that an action, however small it may seem, can change an entire life. Click subscribe and continue walking with us through stories that move, inspire, and transform.